We ready to go? Good evening, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to be here with us tonight, and welcome to the City of Cupertino's Community Forum on Policing, Part 2. Tonight we have a few special panelists from Fremont Union High School District, Cupertino Unified School District, and Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office, West Valley Division, to discuss policing in Cupertino. I'd like to make some introductions. First, CUSD Interim Superintendent Stacy McAfee-Yao, CUSD Senior Director for Student Services, Joe Bedell.
Good evening.
Fremont Union High School District Deputy Superintendent Graham Clark. Fremont Union High School District Superintendent Polly Beauvais, who I understand has a few remarks for a little bit later.
Thank you.
And lastly, Captain Sheriff Urena from County Sheriff's Office. Welcome, everybody. And I wanted to open it up by saying that I'd like to also acknowledge that we have members of our Cupertino City Council in the audience, but not on the panel today. Vice Mayor Darcy Paul, Council Member Rod Sinks, Council Member Leon Chow, and I believe that's it. I'm sorry if I missed somebody. And, you know, this is a second, Mayor Stephen Scharf. I would also like to say that this is our second community forum in a long series of events to get us talking. And this one in particular is provided for our alumni and teens to ask questions and provide comments and have their voices heard with regard to this topic. So what I'd like to do is give Polly some time to make a few comments. I will then talk about a few ground rules and how to interact with everybody on this format. And then we will move on to receiving comments from our teams and our alumni. Over to you, Polly. You're on mute.
Am I unmuted now? Is this all right? Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to make a few remarks before we begin this evening. And I want to start by thanking all of you for joining us in this listening session today. And we're eager to hear from all of you, as many as possible. And we know that all these listening sessions are an effort on our part to learn as much as we can. I want to thank both the City of Cupertino and the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office for partnering with us to host this meeting and their willingness to do so. And I want to begin by saying how proud I am to work with educators, staff, students, community members, and partner organizations who believe that public schools can make powerful agents of change in society and who are willing to commit to efforts to make that happen. And this is part of those efforts. While FUHSD has been working on issues of equity and inclusion for many years in many different ways, we absolutely know we can and must do more. We have heard from many students, alums, staff, and community members asking us to examine our practices, our curriculum, our professional development, and other areas to move towards becoming an anti-racist school system. We have committed to responding to the requests that have been made of us, and this begins by starting a dialogue with members of our staff, students, and our parent community to build a collaborative effort that addresses the areas where we have to work, where we still have much work to do. It is our hope that tonight will be one piece of a much larger dialogue. And again, I very much thank you for giving me the opportunity to just say those few words and for including us in tonight's meeting. And I do look forward to hearing from the participants.
Great. Captain Urena?
Good evening. How's everyone doing? Thank you very much for, again, including me in this conversation. For those residents community members that weren't with us the first time, I just want to kind of explain our organization because we are a large organization. And I'll do it briefly. The organization has about 2,500 employees, the Sheriff's Office, and we're broken down into 4 major bureaus. We have our administrative services, we have our custody services, we have our support services, and then we have what we call the enforcement services. The enforcement services includes the West Valley Patrol Division, right? And so that's this division here. My name is Captain Rich Urena. I manage this division. And so I provide law enforcement services to the city of Cupertino, the city of Saratoga, town of Los Altos Hills, and the western unincorporated areas. So for purposes of our discussion, we're going to concentrate on this division, the things that we do here, how we collaborate with the community in making sure that we are representing the organization in a way that we all agree we should. Even though we are a large organization, we do share the same core values. And I just want to take one of those out so I can highlight it. And it reads, we strive to maintain the highest level of public trust. And that is just one of 10 core values that we have. And I am thankful that I'm given this opportunity today to kind of hear from our community in terms of what we can do better. What's happened across our country, our nation, our world is something that I had never envisioned, never thought that we would be here today. But I recognize that things are being done incorrectly. And so I'm hoping that by having this conversation today, that information is being shared so that we can look at how we can improve our services. And so for that, I'm extremely grateful. Thank you, that's it.
Okay, so before we get started, so for anybody who wants to ask a question, make a comment, we're going to allow for oral communications because sometimes these formats are not very satisfying to interact in, so we're going to do that. If you have a question, you can either raise your hand, or you can press *9 if you're on just the phone, or if you see a question that's spooling up in the chat, in the Q&A chat, you can upvote it by pressing by liking it. So there's a couple of different ways to spool up, and if there's a number of people who like a certain question that somebody is asking or posing to the panelists, I'm happy to take a look and see which ones have the most, and I'm going to scan and make sure that I ask the one that is most popular first. So why don't we open it up right now for comment? Each person will have about 30 seconds to ask their question or make their comment, and in hopes of trying to help everybody have a voice today. So thank you. So let's see, we have, I don't see any hands raised right now. Brian will help me with that. I do have some question in the chat, so I'll just start with that. How's that? This might go to Captain Urena. Well, it's possible it could go to any one of you. How do you morally justify, it's a bit of a loaded question, justify ruining the lives of high schoolers over truancy and drug offenses?
Okay, so I can try to answer that. And I think what we need to do is really explain the various models of school resource officers, right? So we have one model where a school resource officer is assigned to each school, right? And that officer is essentially enforcing the law, making sure that certain regulations, policies are being followed, essentially an enforcer. We have another model where we have officers and deputies that don't necessarily work at one school, right? They actually bounce around and provide enforcement services to schools. And then we have another model that we use here in Cupertino, and that is a counseling type model where the deputies, again, they're not assigned to just one school, they're assigned to an area. And so what they do is they touch bases with the educators, with the students. They're essentially trying to build relationships, trying to help. Listen, we've all been in school, we know how difficult it can be sometimes. And so the SROs that we have here, 2 of them in Cupertino, are building relationships. And so we are not looking for, the SROs are not in schools, looking for crime. What they're doing is they're trying to guide students in a particular direction. And so when we talk about truancy, maybe the school can talk about that, but our approach is we will support the school in any which way we can. We support the parents, and we support the students. And so because somebody's being truant doesn't necessarily mean that the sheriff's office needs to be involved. Certainly we can help counsel, try to figure out what we can do to help the student. But we try not to, again, get into this enforcement mode. In regards to drug offenses, again, we don't need to be involved in a lot of these things. The kids nowadays, they're going to make some mistakes. They're going to do things that don't necessarily rise to the level of the sheriff's office being called. And so we have this excellent working relationship with our school districts where we kind of stay out of this area unless we're called. And even if we're called, our approach is not to take kids to jail, to do any of that. It's simply to understand what's going on and to consider how our interaction is going to potentially change the student's life in the future. So again, our approach is not, to be at a school, to look for somebody running a red light, to look for kids having contraband, something like that. It's essentially to be at the schools when needed to help support the schools, the parents, the students, guide them in the right direction, give them resources, and be able to work together to get to a certain place.
I wonder, could I make a comment on the truancy part too? And I just want to say, as a school district, we know there's a big correlation between attendance and graduation and going to college, and, getting on to the next step in your life. And so truancy for us is a big issue as a school district. And I would say our practice has really evolved over the last few years. And 10 or 15 years ago, we used to have a truancy abatement program. And sometimes actually we would suspend students who were truant. And if you think about it, it doesn't make any sense to suspend somebody who's not coming to school, because actually what we need to do is get them to come to school. So we've really evolved over in our practice. And now we have a truancy intervention program that meets with parents and meets with students to find out what's the reasons that they're not coming to school. And actually, we have a different set of consequences now. And actually, we have a Saturday school program. And in some cases, if students are not coming to school, we assign them to that program in addition to the parent meetings. And so calling law enforcement for truancy would just not be one of our normal course of action. We would try all these other ways to address the issue before we'd ever do that. And actually, truancy is not really something we would normally call law enforcement for.
Okay, great. And that first question I neglected to say was from someone who was anonymous. And typically what I do is I read the first name of the person who's asking the question. This next one is the next highest votes with 4. Let's see. Yes. This is from Amar. In light of the recent policing events in the U.S., how worried, I think what he means to say is how worried do I need to be, or how worried I will be as a parent of a student of color? Who wants to answer that one? Captain Urena, do you want to try that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I would say is that our law enforcement officers here are extremely well trained. They attend many, many courses to understand their biases, to understand how they can interact with people from different cultures, right? And so the question in terms of whether or not the parents should be concerned from actions of my deputies, I would say that again, we're well trained. If there's a specific concern, I would love to hear it. I can tell you that in the last several years, I have not received any complaints on how my staff's been performing their duties in the school districts. A matter of fact, they go above and beyond to making sure that people they feel inclusive and that they get the same level of treatment that any other person would get. So If there's an outlier there, I'd love to hear it. But I can assure the resident that the systems that I have in place, the review process, if you will, the contacts that deputies make with students are all reviewed. Everything that they do is on a body-worn camera. There's footage. We review it. Anytime there's a use of force incident, it's on camera. It goes through a pretty extensive review process so that I can determine if there's any kind of policy or procedure violation. So the systems we have in place, I think speak volumes in terms of how we've been performing our services. So I wouldn't worry about that.
And I don't know, could I add to that?
Sure.
I just wanted to say, you know, I think that Captain, he mentioned the model, and I just wanted to say that, you know, there are different models for SROs and school policing across the state and across the country. Some districts actually have a district school police force, and Los Angeles, Oakland might be an example of that. And these are district employees actually who are also police officers that work in the schools. Many districts have an SRO or NRO model, which is school resource or neighborhood resource officer, where the officer is assigned to the campus. And they're basically there every day. They may even have an office on the campus, and they're doing routine discipline. They might be supervising at lunch or brunch or things like that. I just wanted to say our relationship with the Sheriff's Department is quite different. We share 2 officers over about 20 schools. And so the officers are really only on campus when they're called or you know, 2 or 3 times a week. It's not like it's a daily presence as it might be in some schools. So I mean, I would say they're there to support the school, but they're not there doing routine things with students. That's just not how it works right now.
Okay, thank you. This next uploaded question is from Nathan. Why can't we redistribute money to mental health and drug counselors and take cops off of campuses completely?
Can I try that one?
Sure.
So it's a great question, and one that we wanted to be sure we knew all the details so that we can answer it and really think about it ourselves. Graham has started to tell a little bit about the relationship we have with our neighborhood resource officers or our school resource officers, and how they are not on our campuses unless we ask them to be. They do not do routine discipline. But the question of, is there money to be saved on policing and shared with counseling is an important one. So I'm going to ask you to allow me to read from something, because I want to be sure I'm giving you exactly the right information because of what we have looked up to try to answer that question. In terms of mental health services, we happen to have some of the most extensive mental health services of almost any school district in Northern California. We currently fund 5.5 school psychologists, 6.8 licensed therapists to support our general education population across 5 campuses. And additionally, we have 6.9 full-time psychologists and 9.3 licensed therapists or social workers who serve and support our students with identified disabilities. In addition to that, we have school counselors, and counseling is part of the training of our assistant principals. The cumulative cost for these services is approximately $2.35 million per year for general education and $2.64 million for special education. And these costs do not include the contracted services where we serve some of our students with the most significant emotional disturbances and issues. We have 2 school nurses, we have social service workers. In addition to those, and the total cost for everything comes to well over $5 million a year. We're glad to be spending that money. And yes, you have a right to ask, could there be more? I think there always could be more services for our students. But we hope that this is an example of how much we care about this part of mental health. So let's compare that to what's going on with our school resource officers. We, as a district, spend roughly $12,000 to $15,000 a year for the support services that we get from the Cupertino Sheriff's Department. The transferring that to mental health services would not be significant in the scope of the amount we already spend. And we believe that given that we only use it when needed, when we feel it's really the appropriate use of bringing in a police officer, we feel that that's an appropriate amount of money to spend, and we appreciate the relationship with them. So I hope that helps with the balance. We understand that the notion of defunding the police comes into saying, be sure to provide other resources for community and the people who live in it. And we already agree with you. We believe that we need as much as we can for our high school community, and that's why we've committed as many dollars as we have. So I hope that helps answer the question.
Okay. The next question is also from an anonymous attendee. Oh, wait a second. We have another one that just, it's moving around, sorry. Instead of the police taking charge of drug cases, why doesn't the district have trained counselors who are experienced with drug abuse take charge of helping these students down a better path?
Graham, do you have the slide, a couple that we have on this? Because we do. And I don't know, Stacy looks like she might be wanting to say something. I don't want to keep her from speaking. Well, I don't know. Graham, do you want to show the slide? Because maybe it's worthy. We agree. And in fact, we do. We have several organizations we work with to provide drug classes and intervention, and that is what students are assigned to when they have an offense. It sometimes depends on how many offenses they've had, but our goal is to have a supportive climate. And perhaps the best slide is the last one, unless you want to talk about the progression of interventions. And I don't know how easily you can see this, but the bottom of this triangle are services that we anticipate and want to give to all students and parents, and help them know about what substance abuse looks like and what they can do. We have parent presentations in English and Spanish routinely in our schools. And we have a family engagement institute that has a 3-week student and parent course around drug issues. And then we have at the next level, you'll see the drug intervention course and the perspectives course on positive decision making. Those are courses where we assign students if they have had a drug disciplinary incident. And then it can move up from there, where we actually do have a 10-week program for students that may feel that they need some help with substance abuse. So Advent is one of the organizations we work with. They have a step-up program that is for longer-term addiction or involvement with drugs. So we do have this in place. And I don't know, Graham, if you want to speak to any more, Captain Irina.
Yeah, and I think our thinking on this has evolved really over the last 10 or 15 years too. And going back when I was a principal 10 or 15 years ago, we had a zero tolerance policy, and we would actually suspend and often expel for minor drug abuse. And honestly, we've gone to these classes and restorative forms of justice rather than suspension or expulsion for minor drug use. And I'll separate that from drug sales. Drug sales is still very serious to us, and if a student is selling drugs on campus, we do want to stop that. But minor drug use, we have turned to more of some of the courses and intervention strategies that Superintendent Bovee mentioned.
And if I may jump back in, I'm sorry, I was very slow on my microphone there, just maybe to catch up as well with CUSD, since we don't directly pay into the funding of our SRO, but we certainly utilize our services where the amount of our money and resources, we have counselors available in our middle schools, we have our psychologists, we have mental health therapists. We spend over $5 million on those support systems, and we spent the last 2 years really building in an MTSS system, a multi-tiered support system for students, because even though, we do have our kindergartner students, we do see issues, and we do recognize the need to step in and have those supports on a daily basis. And so, that's really where our efforts and our money are. Our SRO is there to support us as we need, but it's certainly not on our campuses on a daily basis. Joe, as our senior director, actually oversees a lot of the MTSS program and the progress that we've made over these last couple of years.
Okay. If there's nobody else speaking on that one, we have a comment that I'll read, and then I'll move to the next question. I don't support defunding police for our school district. I would worry too much about children's safety. And then there's another question from Nathan. How does Fremont Union High School District justify expressing concern for student well-being, yet pouring $24,000 into partnerships with the police, an institution that displays little regard for student safety.
Well, I guess I would say that in our experience, that's not been the case. We have seen, I don't want to pretend that every interaction between any of us in our school district or in any of these organizations that are represented here are always 100% as positive as we want with students. I think we all know that there are mistakes that are made, and we all know that we're working really hard to do better. But what we do is continue to work together in that way. So when we have spoken about any issues, we go back to the captain and say, we have an issue. If you have an issue, there are complaint forms. If you want to remain anonymous, there are ways you can issue a complaint and we will act on it. There's nothing that we get like that we don't act on. So if you have had an experience that's a negative experience, Nathan, come forward, talk to us, tell us what it is, and let us try to work on it, because that's our plan. The amount of money, on balance, you just heard that between the two school districts, we spend over $10 million on definitely on the kind of mental health supports that so we do care deeply about our kids, not just because of that, but because of all our actions. But to presume that we're going to be doing everything right every day, people make mistakes. And if we've made one, and we've made one with you, I'd like you to come forward and talk to us about it and give us a chance to make it right, because that's what we'd want to do and learn from it.
Okay, his comment is also the next uploaded. It says, no reported cases of misconduct means nothing when you realize that you're reporting someone's misconduct to the same institution that perpetrated the misconduct.
I don't agree with that. We've taken action over and over again with our own administrators, with our own staff. I've corrected my own behavior. So I don't know what your particular circumstance is, Nathan, but without the details, I don't know how to be more helpful, but to tell you that I'm sincere when I say, please come forward. We won't be ignoring it. We'll be taking it seriously. And I would presume I could speak for anybody on this call in that regard.
Okay, next question is from Ryan. Assuming students return to school in the fall, there will likely be a requirement to wear masks. What is the sheriff's office policy for mask wearing while on duty?
Our current policy requires our deputies to wear a face covering anytime that they're out in public where they cannot practice social distancing. And so to the extent that they can practice social distancing, for example, let's say they're 50 feet away from someone, they're not necessarily required to wear a face covering. And so that's consistent with the orders that we've seen. However, for our SROs, specifically, if they're in fact in a school setting, they will be required to wear a face covering.
Okay, next question is from Vera. Our community is a very diverse community, and one event happened in one location cannot represent what happened in our community here. So that's it's a comment from Vera. The next question or comment is from Mark. An anonymous former officer wrote this article that has been circulating, and he cites a link. And I assume this is a clip from that. Of bias training, they write, increased bias training, a quarterly or even monthly training session is not capable of covering over years of trauma-based camaraderie in police forces. I can tell you from experience, we don't take it seriously. This is from the article. The proctors let us cheat on whatever tests there are, and we all make fun of it later over coffee. So this Mark's question is, how is bias training administered to officers in I would assume your department, Captain Urena? He says, how is bias training administered to officers in these departments?
Yeah, so I don't know the credibility of this anonymous person, the officer, the study, so I'm not going to speak to that. What I can tell you, though, is that the sheriff, Laurie Smith, takes bias-based training, procedural training, all the training that we do extremely seriously. And there is a process that we take. People get signed in, signed out, are confirmed to attend these courses. And the systems we have in place afterward are put in place to ensure that those trainings that our staff attend are in fact being followed. For example, we do take statistical data on people that we stop in the field. We do require our staff to turn on their body-worn cameras anytime they're making contact. We do require our vehicles to have cameras, in-dash camera systems, so that every time they're driving a little fast, assuming they're chasing someone, the camera turns on automatically, or when they're pulling somebody over, the camera turns on automatically. Every time they're contacting a member of the public where they're performing enforcement duties, there are systems in place that allow us to go back and review how they in fact handle that incident. And so this system that we have in place ensures that those trainings that we provided to our staff are being followed. And as Polly mentioned, have we made mistakes in the past? Absolutely. That's the reason that I'm here, is to make sure that we don't make mistakes, but if mistakes are being made, to quickly move to be able to correct those. And so again, I don't know the study, but I can tell you that the training that deputies do take is taken extremely seriously. And there are systems in place. I mentioned one, but there are a bunch of other ones that allow us, the managers, to ensure that those trainings are actually being followed.
Okay. As a reminder, I'm kind of looking at our participant panel, and I don't see any hands raised. So you can raise your hand if you want to be called on, or if you're on the phone, you press *9. The next question from the chat, though, is from, I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name, Xiaohua. Is there any change of drug policy on campus moving forward? We do not like drugs on campus.
Well, I can answer that one. I'll say, as school districts, we don't like drugs on campus either, and we don't like alcohol. And, I think during class time and during school time is one consideration, but as a high school district, we have a lot of events, and, I'm thinking of dances and proms and sporting events at night. So drugs come into play there too. And I would say, we don't allow that. And just going back 15 years ago, I will tell you there has been a big change in our policy and our practice. And it used to be we would suspend students. If you were found with drugs, we would suspend you routinely for 5 days. And then you have to think about that. Does that really teach a student anything? You came to school with drugs and you got suspended. What did you learn from that suspension? And probably not too much. I think going back and thinking it was not a smart policy. But we briefed the classes and the drug abuse classes and the intervention classes that we have. That's actually a more effective way of dealing with the problem, because I think people can go to those classes and learn how drug abuse affects them and how it hurts their health, but also it hurts their academic performance. And we've kind of used that as a way of restorative justice rather than resorting to suspension and expulsion in this case.
I would also say that the work that we do with our parents helps us, because then parents can be more aware if there's a drug issue at home, and they can alert us and we can work together to make that right. So I appreciate that partnership with our parents and the education process we have that addresses the issue of drugs.
Great. Next question is from Mark. Are officers armed when on our campuses?
They are.
Okay. So there's that. Okay, the next question is from Mega. Many students have brought up stories of officers disproportionately targeting Black or Latinx students. What kind of anti-racist implicit bias training do officers have to prevent this?
Yeah, so the Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training, which we call POST, is the state commission that regulates peace officers in the state of California. And what they do is they require a certain type of training. Unfortunately, we don't think it's enough. It's 24 hours every 2 years. And so part of that is this de-escalation training, tactical communication, things like CPR, first aid. On top of that, we feel that we need to provide more training to our deputies. And so for the last 10 years or so, we moved into a staffing model, where deputies work Tuesday through Friday, and they have Saturday, Sunday, Monday off. And that creates this two-team kind of a model where if you're not working Tuesday to Friday, you're working Saturday, Sunday, Monday. In the hours, the way it works out is every month, there's 10 hours built in there where deputies, they have to work. And so every month, on top of the 24 hours that are required by post, every month we have a full day of training every month of the year. And so what that does is it allows us to focus on training that's relevant for the time. And so to answer the person's question there, we've done trainings related to implicit biases, bias-based, procedural justice training, a lot of de-escalation type training, communication training. Unfortunately, we have to train on active shooter type training. It is a little bit complicated, and so we want to make sure that our staff are well trained in case something ungodly happens in our schools. We have training that involves community members that come in to talk to our deputies about things occurring, and so there's a lot of training that deputies attend. Again, this is monthly. Every month, one shift, a full day of training. That's on top of the requirements of 24 hours every 2 years.
Okay, so I see one hand raised with Van, but what I think I'm going to do is take one more question from the chat, and then I'll go over to Van, and then there's another one from Yusuke. So this one is anonymous. Like Mega said, with this precedent as a background, students may feel unsafe/uncomfortable with the presence of law enforcement. What other resources can we use to help students?
Well, I think it's a great question, but I also think that if they're feeling uncomfortable with the rarity of the times that we have our school resource officers on campus, then the school district, with input from students, and I think the Sheriff's Department is more than willing to sit down and say, how can we make this better? What is worrying you? What is going on? So we can get the details. And I would say to you, from what you heard from Graham Clark, I think it's fair to say we call the sheriff less and less. We are doing different kinds of interventions on our school district already, but I'm not discounting your feelings at all. If you are feeling unsafe or you have students and friends that are feeling unsafe, let's start that dialogue. Let's figure out what makes that uncomfortable, because I don't think that's definitely not our goal, and we'd like to address it.
I just want to mention on the school resource side, before we ever call the sheriff, many schools have deans, all of our schools have assistant principals, we have guidance counselors, and student advocates, school psychologists. So all those resources are available to students that need help, and we can also call outside resources if necessary, but I mean, those are all available to all students.
I do want to, I think Stacy's muted and wants to talk. I'll defer to her.
I was just going to say for CUSD, at a point where we would call an SRO, it's a very serious situation. We have so many layers of support that we would go through prior to ever needing to reach out to our SRO. And so we have our counselors, we have our assistant principals, our principals that really are those first layers and many layers before we would ever go into needing the police support.
Okay, so I'm going to go to Van. So Van, I'm going to... Ben, can you hear us? Oops. I'm trying to unmute you. I think you also have to unmute yourself. There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Van, go ahead.
With the riots been happening in Minneapolis lately, when the student return to school in the fall, will there be any officer on campus? Also, will the district have the school teach student drug education in the near future?
The answer is yes. We will be teaching, we will continue our work with more and more information for drug education for both students and families. In terms of having a police officer on campus, again, we only bring them on when needed. We have no, in general, we would not just have someone stationed there unless there had been some very serious issue. Graham, do you want to add to that, or?
Yeah, in response to the riots, I don't think that we would ask the school resource officers to come, but at the start of school, I would say there is one service that the sheriff provides, which is very helpful, and people get out of the habit of what proper driving rules are around schools at the start of school. And honestly, when school's in session and hundreds of kids are coming on campus, they need to watch the speed limits and watch the right turn. So we do have traffic officers, and I think they help just remind everybody how to be safe, as you're entering parking lots, dropping students off. So that's a helpful resource. And when the SROs have come, I can tell you, we did a couple of years ago have a couple of bomb threats, actually, unfortunately, 2 bomb threats at Cupertino in 1 year. And in the days immediately following those bomb threats, we did ask the resource officers to be a presence. And I think people felt better as they walked into school just after going through that traumatic experience. So that would be a way, but I don't think in regards to the events in Minneapolis that we would actually have the SROs, not for that reason.
I would also like to add too as well that, of course we'll be calling out SROs for those high level pieces or student needs, but it's very rare. And on the flip side of it, our SROs do come out and provide a lot of great educational programming for our students, whether that's through safety, prevention, parent education, oftentimes even just being visible with those students and building trusting relationships with our kids. And so I think at that tier 1 level, it really does reinforce and put our SROs in a very positive light with our students as a kind of another connection point for our students to feel safe, to feel comforted, and also to kind of reinforce some of those principles that are being taught about prevention, safety, and providing those resources for our kids.
I want to say that I just got texted by one of our principals who points out that there are times when parents or students want to speak to a police officer and they request that. And that would be another time that we call up and say, could you come? So sometimes that request does not come from us. It's not a hugely common thing, but it does happen. And so I think that's another reason that sometimes we have police officers present.
Okay, I'm going to go back to the chat, and then I'll get the next person with the hand raised is Yusuke, if I pronounced that correctly. Then his next one is also from Anonymous. Perhaps you could start by explaining the role of the police in school. I'm new to this role, and I share the concern that I think I'm hearing from other parents that the district is spending money on law enforcement while critical services like school nurses and counseling services are being reduced. And I have a message here that Stacy would like to take a cut at this particular question. No? There's a weird mic thing. Okay. So any of you can take that answer.
I think it's really hard, given the proportion of money that we're talking about here, where Cupertino doesn't pay any money. They give use of their fields to the city, which is partly how all this happens. We give between $12,000 and $15,000 while we spend $5 million. Again, I'd say to you, could we spend more? Yes, but will $12,000 make that difference? I don't really think so. But we could certainly work with the community and our own staff and our students and think about what are some services that we're missing. We've just added another school nurse to our system. And we have many outside relationships that add to the services that would be more specialized, I would call it, that we wouldn't normally have a regular routine employee in our district. So that combination. There's a variety of roles that they have in our schools, and so I don't know if you want to talk about that, somebody else, but I would say I get that we need as much counseling and support as we can get, which is why we prioritize that kind of very high level spending compared to the small amount. And I don't know that the small amount on SROs would offset or give any real significant additional service. And I know we would miss the support that we do get from them, but I want to address the other concerns that we heard here tonight.
Yeah, I'm also happy to add a couple of other ways in which our SROs help support our schools too. I did mention a little bit about the educational programming that they provide in safety prevention, parent education, or the school visits to just connect with kids and staff. But too, they also serve on our school attendance review boards and also help to refer and provide intervention and supports for our families who might need it the most. In some cases, referring parents to programs like Parent Project has been very helpful. In addition to that, too, they also work really in conjunction with a lot of our mental health support staff. For example, if there's a student that has a high level of risk based on mental health needs and et cetera, they would also work in conjunction with some of our community partners. In addition to that, too, I think that many of them are also assisting with providing resources to, support with SRO. So we have an SRA, student risk assessment. And we don't have somebody on staff that might be able to assist with an immediate need, that they would also kind of work in conjunction with some of those community providers to help bridge some of those resources to our schools.
Okay, great. I'm going to go to Yusuke. She's had her hand raised for a while. Go ahead, Yusuke.
Hello?
Hello there.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I was wondering when school gets back, and I know that there's a lot of controversy over these different movements and defunding police, abolishing the police, all that thing. So I was wondering if a student were to, for example, tell he or she's personal opinion regarding the movement. I don't think that abolishing the police is going to do anything, or I don't think Black Lives Matter movement is not going to do anything. Well, will that be deemed as racist speech or hate speech and brought punishment in front?
Well, Graham, do you want to give a little, we've done a little work on this. I think this is that difficult balance of being sure that we want to do everything we can to be anti-racist and also understand that we have freedom of speech in this country, and certainly we want to allow civil discourse between people who disagree. But we cannot allow any kind of harassment or bullying. So I think that's sort of the fine line we're talking about. We understand there's differences of opinion within our community, but Graham, maybe you would like to talk more about that.
Yeah, as a school, honestly, one of our duties is actually people are going to have differences of opinion, and we have to learn how to talk about that and kind of debate that and go through that. And it's part of what we try to do in education. There are often many sides to an issue, and be able to talk about it. So the difference for us, I think, is when it gets into harassment or when it gets into bullying. And someone can have a point of view that you don't agree with and that you don't tolerate and that you don't like. If that view becomes harassment or bullying, then it's time for the school to take action. And that's, we have education code that kind of guides when we can discipline students, when we can suspend them, and they spell out when harassment and when bullying happens. And it really gets to, is it pervasive? Does it disrupt the educational environment for other students? And if that happens, then we would need to step in and stop that. But I mean, if you're having a talk about an issue that people disagree on different sides of in a respectful way in a context of a school discussion, I don't think that would be a problem. But you have to make sure it wasn't said in a way so as to antagonize other students or to bully them.
Okay, I see Nelson with his hand raised, but I'm going to go back to the chat and come back to Nelson. So from an anonymous, if there's a campus shooting like Sandy Hook, can those counselors or psychiatrists be on the front line to stop the shooting? We fully support our police and sheriff on campus and everywhere. No defunding needed. On the contrary, with outsider riots everywhere in the Bay Area, we need to fund the police even more. Is there any way we can fund more for our police in Cupertino? I can probably take this one. The city has a contract with the county sheriff's office that we rely on for our police department. And we currently fund them at a level of, it's approximately $14.5 million a year. Now that pays for a lot of things with different areas that I covered in our last community community forum, ranging from things like investigations, traffic enforcement, general law enforcement is the majority of the costs, some costs for SROs. So, the budget is pretty healthy and a very cost-efficient budget for our population. I believe we're the lowest in the county per capita at approximately $223 per person in Cupertino. So I'm very proud of that. And I feel like we get really good services across the board. So I hope that answers that question.
Maybe could I make a comment just on the Sandy Hook and the training? I just wanted to thank the Sheriff's Department and actually our other partners, San Jose Police and Sunnyvale Public Safety. They do provide us training on how to react to an active shooter. And, this is something that's evolved too. If you go back to Columbine, which is the first one that we remember, I think this is 15 or 20 years ago, we had a Code Red training, which was basically lockdown. And we've evolved to something called Run, Hide, and Defend. And the Sheriff Department provides that training to all of our schools each year, and we practice it as staff. And I'm going to say, in terms of who has to respond, I think what we've learned is that situational awareness with Run, Hide, and Defend. And each adult and actually each student on campus has to decide in the event of emergency like that, are they going to run off campus? Or are they going to lock down in their classroom? Or are they going to have to defend as a last resort? And so it's kind of thinking through that process. It's a more nuanced process, and in some cases is more demanding. But I would say that we've had a couple of incidents where we've had to implement it at some of our schools, and it's been very stressful on students. And I think thinking about how, if you were put in that situation, you would respond, a school psychologist might have to respond. I mean, I think every adult on campus needs to be prepared to gather the students that are nearby and pull them in to their classroom, because it could happen to us at lunch or at brunch, and it has happened, and then you don't have your own class, you just got the kids that are outside the door that you quickly pull them and try to make everybody as safe as you can. So just thinking through those strategies is something that the Sheriff's Department helps us do.
Absolutely. And they've also helped us with thinking about it in the aftermath. They've come back, they've dialogued with students, they've talked, and we do an all hands on deck when an incident like that happens and send our mental health professionals to a particular school. And I know the Sheriff's Department has helped with that part too.
Okay, I'm going to go to Nelson. There you go, Nelson.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, perfect. So I guess I want to take this opportunity really quickly to thank you guys for actually having a forum. But with that out of the way, essentially, I had a couple of questions. I noticed that one of my questions already pushed up to the top, but it hasn't been answered yet, so I'll just bring it up now. The first big question is, again, do police officers have a duty to intervene when another officer is displaying, unreasonable force or doing something that poses a threat to the general public? And my second question is kind of more open-ended in regards to what the board's thoughts are on essentially an independent community review board, kind of like what they have in Newark, New Jersey, which potentially may have prosecutorial powers in order to address some of the issues that people have been bringing up about how, well, you can't really trust a department to kind of audit itself and then find no wrongdoing, right? I feel like asking someone to investigate themselves is implicitly going to have some kind of bias to it, right? So with that being said, what would be the reception, I guess, from the police department potentially for something like an independent community review board?
So to answer your first question, which I believe was, do we have a duty to intervene when there's a threat to the general public? And to answer that is absolutely. We have an obligation to our communities, whether it's our school community, our business community, whatever community is out there, we have an obligation to be able to respond and ensure people's safety. So that's something that we practice every single day. That's something we talk about frequently. Keep in mind, there are things that we need to do so that we can do our jobs safely, right? And that is to make sure that we have the proper gear so that we can stop whatever threat's going on. And so absolutely, we have an obligation to make sure that we take care of our residents. In regards to a civil oversight type program. It is something that the sheriff has endorsed. It is something we believe would benefit our organization. And so it is something that you'll see here in a few months. The county did move forward with what they call the Office of Correction and Law Enforcement Monitoring. And so we will have an independent monitor that will be given a task to ensure that we're following our policies and procedures.
Okay, so it is 6:27, and I'm just saying that because I also, at the end, I'm going to hold a few minutes because we got some questions emailed to us in advance, and I want to make sure that we had some time to answer those since that person took the time to send them forward. I'm going to go back to the chat, and since we answered Nelson's question orally, I'll go to Alexandra's comment. What is being done in response to the change.org petition, which has almost 13,000 signatures, created by a Monte Vista High School student who faced racist hate speech on campus? Her demands include, quote, to look into possible criminal negligence charges against MVHS administrators, FUHSD administrators, and Santa Clara County law enforcement. All information regarding what happened with the original case and school resource officer released, all messages released to my family and those involved to reopen my criminal case against the boys involved, Monte Vista High School and Fremont Union High School District, to reform their policies to actively protect students from this ever happening again.
Yeah, I could talk about that. Unfortunately, when we're talking about minors, there's not much we can really say. What I can tell you is that there was an investigation that occurred in 2016. The sheriff's office and the school district took that incident extremely seriously. We have spent over 400 hours, I would say close to 500 hours investigating, talking to over 40 people. These are formal interviews, authoring search warrants, trying to get to the bottom of what happened. Once we did that, we submitted our case to the district attorney's office, who ultimately decides whether or not charges need to be filed. And they made that decision not to file any charges. I can tell you that there was a lot of interviews, a lot of work. Because of the allegations being made, we wanted to make sure that we took the time to understand everything that occurred and to be able to address that. And I feel confident that we did that.
Okay, Anonymous, next question.
You know, can I make one comment on that too before we move on? And I just wanted to let you know, as a school district, there's a law that guides us, and it's called FERPA, and it stands for the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. And this is something that often happens to us. And let's say that we have a discipline event and it's involving 2 or 3 or 4 students. Often it comes up, hey, can you tell me what's happening with the other party or the other student? And unfortunately, you know, as a school administrator or principal, you have to say, you know what, I can only talk about you and the consequences with your child. I can't tell you what's happening to somebody else. And that involves their discipline records, their academic records, all of those things. So we're kind of bound. We really can't share the records of other students with the public or other students. And in this case, I mean, I can guarantee you that when the Monte Vista administration found out about this event, they called the police right away and an investigation was conducted. And the school did an investigation, and so did the sheriff's department. In fact, they did too, and they took action. And having said that, the things that were said were horrible. And we don't condone it. We don't like it. It saddens us that happened. And you know, we definitely want to look for ways to make sure that would never happen to any student again. And that's for sure. We are trying to put practices in place to do that and procedures that would do that. And the other thing that's happening is, you know, there is a lawsuit pending, and whenever there's a lawsuit pending, it's a civil suit. It binds our hands in terms of what we can talk about too. And so with the FERPA laws that already prohibit us to talk about other students, and that protects, you know, both kind of the victim and the perpetrators. We can't talk about either their records with other parents or other public members. And then the lawsuit, those are really two things that we would like to be more open. We're just not really able to do that right now.
And I guess I want to add to this really briefly to say the pain that we've seen in that change.org document that for the victim is obviously very real. And as Graham said, what was said was horrible. We take that extremely seriously. We do not, under any circumstances, want that kind of pain to come to other students, and we want to do the best we can to work with all our students to make sure that doesn't happen. But I don't want our quiet or our adherence to FERPA, as Graham said, or our hands being tied by the lawsuit to indicate to anybody that we don't have feelings for the victim and the concern that she's brought forth.
Okay. There's nobody's hands are raised, so I'm gonna go back to the chat, anonymous. Perhaps you could start by explaining the role of the police in school. Oh, we already did that one, didn't we? I think we already did that one. The next one is a comment from Vera. I believe our police is pretty careful in respect to people with different colors. The next one is also anonymous. When are these, quote, appropriate scenarios to bring, when are these appropriate scenarios to bring in police officers? Please elaborate on when this has happened.
Yeah, I can give you a few examples of that when we typically would call an SRO or a police officer, but in one case it would be a case of sexual assault. Another case could be weapons, if the weapon was brought to campus. Certainly drug sales could be, a case, and a fight that involves an injury, like a very serious fight, might be one reason that we could do that. And in some cases, it would be an issue that we have heard of child abuse or something like that, and we're mandated reporters, and we need to call. So those would be some examples I could say.
I would also add too is in regards to welfare checks. If we're worried about the welfare of our students, we would also involve our SRO officer, potentially to accompany an administrator to check on the welfare of the student.
Okay, next question in the chat. Don't you think personal counselors that students build relationships would be much more helpful than courses?
And does she mean our academic courses?
Or class? I think they mean classes or training.
I think both are important.
Or maybe curriculum.
Curriculum.
I think both are important, and I think we'd all agree that teachers can't be effective at teaching the courses they teach without those personal relationships. And then there's the relationships we need to form outside of school. I mean, one of the things that I think we could consider is how to, when we hear that students are fearful about having our SROs on campus, maybe we need to work harder to form those relationships and make sure that they have some personal connection to the folks that are coming on our campus, so they don't seem like strangers or people that might be someone to fear. So I think that building those relationships are critical, and I think our curriculum is critical. I think we have to do both.
I would echo that. I think there's the value of both of those. We need to form our relationships with our in-person support, but there's value in the trainings and the classes that can be provided. So I see both of them as very useful and needed.
Okay. Next question in the chat, also anonymous. Is there anything being done about the recent Fremont Union High School District, Fremont High School sexual assault accusations?
Yeah, I can answer that. So the weekend we were made aware of these online, I think it's a Twitter account, where these are being listed. We have, and several people have emailed us directly. We have responded to all those emails. So has Brian Emmert, the principal, and Trudy Gross, who's our Title IX coordinator for this, has also responded. We've asked that those numbers and email addresses be posted on the site to encourage students to come forward and help us investigate that. And any other explicit accusations where we know enough to follow up, we are already doing investigations on those. So if you bring something forward, we're going to look into it, and we take it very seriously. And so again, I hope that this is another opportunity for me to say, please let us know, contact us. Ryan at Fremont, any one of us you're seeing on this event tonight, Trudy Gross, who is our timeline officer, we're at the ready to do more. And we certainly are looking at the pattern as well to see if we can do something in the district to talk about things like consent. We think young students need to be well versed in how to be clear about what they're okay with and what they're not. And so I think it's already created a lot of dialogue among all our principals about the kind of training we'd like to see district-wide.
Okay, great. I am going to ask one more question in the chat, and then we have a hand raised. This is from Nathan. Have you asked students about their relationships with SROs before claiming that we appreciate the presence of police officers on campus?
Well, my answer would be yes, principals have, and I think that it, depending on the particular, SROs change. So there's some that have had strong relationships with kids, some that are new to the job and haven't formed those relationships. And I think we always can come up with strategies to make those relationships better. So yes, we have asked, and yes, we know there are some students that feel as you expressed tonight. And I think we need to strategize and figure out the specifics, as I said, so we can work on that. We can make it a better relationship. But yes, we have definitely heard from kids they're grateful for the presence. And we've heard, as you've said tonight, that there are some people that don't feel that way. So we've got to fix what we can.
I just wanted to mention part of the process in our district is we regularly survey, parents and students. And I don't know that we've actually, that might be a question we could add to our survey sometime, of an SRO specific question. But the idea of safety does come up a lot. And we do ask kids if they feel safe on campus, if there's an adult that they feel comfortable contacting, and a variety of questions about safety. So it is something that we are aware of, and we try to look for information from students about.
Okay, great. I'm going to go to Mooney. Hi, Mooney. Mooney, can you hear us?
Hello.
Hi, your audio is really a bad connection.
So, I really want to take a moment to thank you, all of you, like the city hall. Yeah. Could you hear me?
Yes, it's a little bit better
Hello.
now. Whatever you're doing is a better reception, so keep going.
Okay. So maybe you can come back to me in maybe 2-3 minutes.
Okay, I'll come back to you. Yeah, okay. In that case, I'll go back to the chat, and I also see another hand raised by Kelly. So David says defunding law enforcement is a bad idea. The next one is Kelly. I'll take her next. Kelly. Hi, Kelly.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, cool. So yeah, I think this is really great that we have a forum like this. And so a question I wanted to ask was, so I know like the Black Lives Matter is a like huge movement, and like it's like worldwide and widespread. And I definitely agree that all races need to be respected. So my question is, how many like cases of Asian racism have been reported in our city?
I'll try and answer on the top line. I heard at the beginning of the pandemic, I would say in the March timeframe, I heard of a couple of incidences in some of our retail establishments, but I don't hear of it widespread, and I certainly do not hear of it kind of consistently. I have experienced it myself, but not in the city of Cupertino.
Yes, I just want to add to that, and that is that we did get a few reports of motorists yelling things that were inappropriate, but nothing to the extent where we're seeing it every day or anything like that. I don't recall the last time where we had any type of racist comment yelled at, mentioned. to any of our residents.
Okay, I'm going to move back to the chat, and then we're going to come back to Mooney. Mark is asking, in 2005, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the police officers do not have a constitutional duty to protect any individual. He cites a website. Are these officers held to a higher standard?
Absolutely. Absolutely held to a higher standard. We have policies in place, procedures in place. There are outlines that tell our deputies that we need to be involved in things like sexual assaults, domestic violence, active shooters. It just goes on and on and on. And, you know, regardless of what some law says in regards to us not needing to be involved in certain types of crimes, the reality is that we're peace officers. We're here to protect the public. And so our policies are geared that way, where we're telling our deputies, listen, you are a peace officer. We train you. We trust you to do this job. And we train you extremely well to do this job. And we make sure that our public and our communities are safe. And so there are circumstances, and you can certainly Google it, where certain agencies, you know, have literally let folks die for whatever reason. And the debate is, you know, should first responders have to respond, right? The reality is we do. We absolutely do. The Sheriff's Office is committed to making sure that we respond, that we provide the best service that we can. And if you know our model, for those residents that have called us and we've interacted with you, we respond to everything, mail theft, identity theft, you know, your dog's too loud, neighbor's dog's too loud. We respond to everything. And so that has been our philosophy from the Sheriff's direction, and that will continue to be our philosophy.
Okay, I'm going to go back to Mooney. Mooney, you want to unmute yourself? Okay.
Yeah. Could you hear me?
Much better. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So, no, I posted my comments on the chat as well. So I really would like to thank you all for doing a phenomenal job handling this situation, answering all these questions patiently. I think, you know, the city office, school administration, sheriff's office, you guys are doing a fantastic job. I really would like to thank you. One question though, can you share data as to how many times over the last 5 years SROs were called into our schools to handle whatever situations? I'm just looking for aggregate numbers.
Well, although I don't have data for 5 years in front of me, I do have some data, and it's not broken down in terms of what the SROs are handling. This is data that I pulled from our system, our records management system. And here's what I can tell you. In the high schools, in the Cupertino, Homestead, Monte Vista high schools, we had 499 calls. Again, this is not the school resource officers going to the schools to do anything. This is just calls that we have received that have a nexus to the schools. And these can be something like a crash that occurred across the street, to potentially a mental health type call, to a theft, something like that. And out of that, there were 38 reports that we took. And this time frame is from August 1st, last year, 2019, to June 30th. So 499 calls, 38 reports. In our middle and elementary schools, we had 344 calls and 14 reports. And again, this includes anything and everything that is associated to the schools. Oftentimes we get collisions that happen in and around school. We get complaints that are related to traffic, loud noise, those kinds of things. And so I can tell you that the majority of the time, our school resource officers are not involved in these calls. Matter of fact, they spend the majority of their time handling things that are not crime related. And so the fact that I have these statistics doesn't mean that the SROs are directly involved with this. This is just an overview of our office.
This next question from the chat is from Ryan, and it's somewhat related. Last school year, how many on-campus student arrests were made?
I don't have that data.
Okay. I have Kelly back on with a raised hand, so I will go to her. Kelly?
Yeah. I wanted to ask a follow-up question in regards to my previous question.
Sure.
So both of you guys mentioned that there were like some cases that were heard, but like it seems like it wasn't like very serious, right? But I feel like these cases are still like to be taken seriously, right? So what were like the course of actions that were made after hearing these cases? And also outside of like cases being reported to the police, I've heard like a lot of like stories of like racism, like just in our community in general. And I feel like our community is actually mostly Asian people, right? So to have like such blatant racism in our community, what is being done to like address this issue?
I can take a stab at the racism in our community. You know, these community forums are a start of a way to kind of address the more immediate questions and concerns of not only the public at large, of course, but this forum for the teens and alumni who've been vocal about race issues more recently than not. It is my plan to create a program, and I can't say how long it's going to last, but in the next couple of weeks to a month, the next piece will be to kind of understand implicit bias, for example. Because it's my philosophy that we need to educate ourselves prior to being able to have kind of healthy discussions about race. So I've seen in my previous positions, I've seen an implicit bias study that was very powerful that I think will help people understand that everybody has some, and to become aware of them is super helpful when you're trying to change behaviors. But the other thought I had was at the end of whatever this program looks like, that I'm kind of developing as we go and kind of in my head, I'll write it down eventually, was to ensure that we can get to as many people as possible, but in smaller groups. And so what's hampering me is this COVID thing kind of preventing us from meeting in indoor spaces, or maybe we can do it outdoors, in more focus groups when we're ready to have some healthy discussions about race. To my mind, there's no way to really address race relations effectively and long-term and change culture without sitting down and talking with each other and making the subject not so scary for some people to talk about. But at the same time, creating a safe environment in which all of us can learn a few things, not only about each other, but ourselves. It's a learning process. So that's how I'm planning on approaching it. That's my or the city's commitment to trying to help the culture shift that needs to happen. And some would argue that it's not fast enough, but it's the only way I know how to do it. Culture change and shifting people's views and behaviors is a more evolutionary than it is revolutionary, but I want to be able to take advantage of this time in history where we can actually affect a great amount of change if we just do it right and we're persistent about it. So that's what I would say about what the city's doing.
I can talk a little bit about some of the steps we're taking and some of the efforts we're in the middle of figuring out. So we've had a team of alumni, current students, and staff that have written a letter to our board and to me asking for us to take some very strong action. I responded to that letter. We're now going to go to the talking stage because like you, Deb, I believe these are essential conversations. We have a commitment to address curricular issues and be sure we broaden our curriculum and we make sure that we do address racism and issues in our curriculum, have literature that's widely based, try to do the kinds of things that help open people's eyes to the problems and create a deeper understanding. We have some professional development that has been going on for quite a long time now, and we need to augment that and make sure we take a broader step. We are going to have a variety of committees of teachers that are going to help with that kind of guidance and help with that work. You heard a little bit about the restorative justice approach from Graham, and I think our goal is to continue to look at our data around suspensions, even though we have very few expulsions, and see that we can continue to address that from both a racial lens and any lens we can think of to make sure that we're not being more biased. I mean, I happen to believe all of us carry some implicit bias, and that this is a process, not an act. And it is something we just have to be deeply committed to, that we're going to address our own issues, and we're going to continue to try to seek out and listen to where those issues exist in our institution and work on it. That's why I was encouraging some of the people on this chat to tell us more. Our board has passed 2 resolutions to the first question that I heard. One that was really specific to racism against Asians in our community, and most recently one that spoke to African Americans explicitly, and also being sure that we're supporting anti-racist efforts for all groups. So our board is committed at a policy level, we're committed at a belief level, and then we're working with the groups of people that have approached us with their passion and wisdom to put ourselves together to try to create an even broader, better, deeper plan moving forward. And I have principals who are assigning huge readings and discussions, and it's happening at every level. And I know that they're working on curriculum every day as we think about opening in the fall, which is a whole complicated subject we haven't even talked about here. But that's part of the work that they're doing, is an intent to make sure this is addressed in our classrooms.
Okay, it's about 6:53. I think what I'm going to do, because I still want to leave time for those questions that were sent ahead from Deanna. I'm going to go to the chat. I will go to Nelson if we could see if we can keep our answers succinct. How does school, this is from Xiaohua, how does school help kids understand major social issues outside of the school? Kids could easily pick up radical ideas and be controlled by irrational anger.
Well, I actually think that is the purpose of school. And I mean, I would say our social studies and our English classes will regularly talk about issues like that. But I mean, coming up in a class dialogue about issues like that and how to analyze them and think about them is something we hope that goes on in a lot of our classes.
Okay, and then I'm going to go to Nelson. He's had his hand raised. Nelson?
Yep. So I just wanted to kind of follow up on what I was talking about earlier in regards to my questions with the duty to intervene and also the kind of community review board. The question about duty was not so much like a semantic one, like, oh, should officers do it, but rather, do officers face consequences for not taking such action? So again, my question would be, do officers need to take action if another officer is acting out of line, or is it kind of one of those things where, oh, we'll just deal with it later, or write a report and then hopefully come back to it? And the second question was in regards to, I believe the captain talked about how there was a plan or how there was already something passed for like an independent audit. And I was wondering what exactly the model of that auditing board would be. And how would we ensure that it is truly independent from the sheriff's office and not necessarily influenced by that?
So I'll answer your question briefly here. I know we're running out of time. In regards to your question about the duty to intervene with officers, absolutely. That's in our policy. You can find that online if you go to our website. You're looking at a need to intervene. If deputies do not intervene, they're subject to termination. And so I'll let you read that. In regards to the independent oversight, I can tell you that the responsibilities are going to be to receive complaints, have an obligation to review policy analysis and recommendations, community outreach, mediation, operations monitoring and audit, and that is the monitoring of day-to-day operations, audit and monitor the investigation of complaints. That's their role.
Okay, so what I'd like to do is there were 3 or 4 questions that were emailed ahead of time for this forum. And I believe, Captain Urena, you have the majority of them. So could you read aloud the question and then answer to the best of your ability? And I believe then Polly had one. Is that correct? Okay, so.
I thought we answered those already.
Well, there was a question on the chat that you answered regarding the response to the petition specifically. And this may be a repeat, but I think she has more nuanced questions in the email.
Okay, let me read the question.
Okay.
It says, is the Sheriff, West Valley Department, Fremont Union High School District, Monte Vista High School, and the City of Cupertino leaders going to make a public statement regarding the Justice for Black Students in Monte Vista High School petition with over 10,000 signatures supporting the case be reopened? And again, unfortunately, because we're talking about minors, the only thing I can add to the investigation is that it was submitted to the district attorney's office for them to review. And so they have the investigation. It would be up to them to open the case. I can certainly point you to them at this point, unless there's new information that comes up to us. There's really nothing more that we can investigate. We have spent close to 500 hours on this case. We like I said, we authored search warrants. We interviewed over 40 people. It's a very extensive case. And so to reopen the case, unless there's new information, it has already been submitted to the district attorney's office. The other question is, the West Valley seems to have an issue with SROs feeling like boys are just being boys and nothing threatening. What are you going to do to change this culture in the department, and how are you going to protect Black students moving forward? I would definitely want more information on how SROs are being inappropriate. I can tell you that this allegation of one SRO being inappropriate was investigated by our Internal Affairs Division. We take these things extremely seriously. Any allegation that's made is investigated. We document it. And so this was no different. However, because we're talking about a personnel matter, I can't talk about the specifics of that, other than to say that this particular SRO is not an SRO anymore with us. Not to say that he did something right or wrong. I'm just saying that he's not working as an SRO. And then the last question for me is, will the West Valley Sheriff's Department reopen the case from 2016 and fully investigate the administration, students, and its own SROs? And again, I think I already answered that.
Okay. Was there one question on there for Fremont Union High School District, Polly, or?
There is, and I'm happy to read it. In response to the letter to Monte Vista High School on anti-Blackness that again has thousands of signatures, the current principal of Monte Vista High School, Mr. Klausnesser, said he is aware that the campus is not anti-racist. How is this still happening? What is the district doing to address the seriously dangerous culture at Monte Vista High School? And so I would like to say that to me, being an anti-racist is a constant vigilance. It's a commitment to ensuring that we look at our practice, we look at our behavior, we look at our language. It is that commitment and that those efforts that only allow us to get better over time is what I believe and I know that Ben Klausnesser was speaking about. In terms of, are we dealing with any racist behavior, statements, activities? Yes. And we've evolved ourselves since the 2016 event. We have worked very carefully with a variety of community partners to think about how to do counter speech, how to deal with any kind of hate that we see in our schools. And we are continuing to work to evolve our practices to be sure that we call out those behaviors when they happen, when we see them, and we do not stand by. And I would say that in the incident in 2016, we could have done more counter speech. But in terms of reopening the case, looking at some of these other issues, I have to defer to law enforcement. We certainly did a lot of investigation ourselves. We took this incident very seriously. In fact, we investigated it twice. The first time around misogynistic issues and the second time around the racial issue. So I don't know if Graham wants to add anything to that, but I think there is a difference between addressing racism and being anti-racist. It's a different level of ongoing commitment, and we're committed to both.
Yeah, I just want to say, I'm as we're planning the next year, I'm sure it's a focus of what we want to do, professional development with our administrators and with our staffs, and it's certainly something that we need to grow in. I think we all do, and we need to work on, and we're making plans to do that.
Okay. So I'd like to honor people's time. There's the cutoff at 7:02, but I also want to thank everybody for participating in this. Certainly our folks that we invited from the public, all of our teams and students and alumni who have expressed their concerns and asked the hard questions, and to our panelists for answering those questions to the best of their ability. I would also like to provide, before we cut out, for any kind of closing remarks that anybody wants to have. Apologize that we can't get to everybody, but for closing remarks for the panelists, if you have something you'd like to say, please take that opportunity. Rich?
Yes, first of all, thank you for having me here and being able to talk with residents, alumni, students about our organization. I don't want the community to think that our role in the schools is to enforce the law, period. Absolutely, that's who we are. But we're there to build relationships. No longer are we only being called for crime. We want to build relationships. We want to have a relationship with the students, the teachers, the administrators. I'll give you a few examples of what we do that has nothing to do with enforcing crime. And that is the leprechaun investigation that we do at Garden Gate, right? And so here we have a day where the SRO is investigating whether or not there's leprechauns, and there's this whole relationship that he and she build with the students and the teachers, where the SRO goes there and tries to lift fingerprints, and the purpose of that is to really build these relationships with these young students. We don't want our students to be afraid of us. Oftentimes you'll see our SROs that are wearing polo shirts, not uniform, so that, again, we can be approachable, be able to counsel students, not necessarily to enforce the law. We have other programs that we're part of as well, like Discovery Day at Regnard Elementary, and that is essentially just showing the students our patrol car, what it looks like. We play basketball with some of the students. We participate in Red Ribbon Week. And so there's a lot of events that our school resource officers are part of. And again, when we're dealing with a crime, the school resource officers are encouraged not to handle that. Instead, we bring a deputy that's in patrol to handle that, so that that relationship continues to build. The last thing we want to do is have a school resource officer be involved in this investigation where, yesterday there was this really good relationship that was being built. Instead, we want our school resource officers to continue to build these relationships, to be a support person for students, families in the school. And so again, in closing, I just want to thank you, Deb, for allowing me to be here. I'd like to thank the panelists as well. And hopefully we'll have another opportunity to discuss. I see a lot of folks with a lot of questions here. Thank you.
Thank you. If nobody has anything else, I'm going to close the session.
Thank you. I just want to thank everybody for participating and hope they'll keep asking questions, giving us information, know that we're willing to talk. We really appreciate all we're learning when we're doing this listening.
Great.
I'd like to echo that and just say thank you. And, we're here, we want to listen, we want to hear, we want to react. And so please feel free to reach out. That's what we're in it all together. Great.
Well, thank you so much, everybody. And again, I apologize for not getting to everybody's questions or comments. It's a great and active forum, and we still have like 86 people on. So thank you so much. And we'll be talking soon. Thank you.